Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, and Ramadan Mubarak. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ally, speaking to you from the Muslim Media Hub. This is part of a series in which I'm discussing 30 keys for unlocking the meaning of the Quran. We've already done 2 of those keys. Today, we're looking at the 3rd key, and that is the life of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, as a key to unlocking the meaning of the Quran. How is that a key? The Quran mentions a certain person who is called Abu Lahab in the Quran, and most Muslims have memorized a short surah entitled Surah Al-Lahab. So who was this Abu Lahab? We can learn something about him by reading the commentaries on the Quran. But another approach to this is to know the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and in that life history we'll discover who is this Abu Lahab. That will be one of the keys to understanding this passage. Another person who's mentioned in the Quran by name is Zayd. So who is this Zayd? Again, we can learn from the commentaries, or if we know the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in advance, then we right away unlock the meaning of this passage of the Quran that mentions the name Zayd. Quran mentions many incidents within the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. In order to understand where the Quran is going with that, we need to see the broad scope of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So where do we find his life? There are books that are compiled called books of Sirah, which means basically the life story of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And those books themselves are made up of snippets of information which are pulled together in order to give us a long connected narrative. Now, all of those snippets are not of the same value in terms of authenticity, but we're not concerned with all of the minutiae and all of the smaller details. We just want to see the broad outline to see where the Quran has progressed with its message to the world, where it starts out and where it finishes up. Gradually, there is a development of ideas and thought as the Quran is being revealed to the community over time with more and more instructions. So we can see, for example, in the early days of Islam, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was in his hometown, and there only a few followers were with him, and they did not have much influence. They could not establish the faith as a system of governance in the community. Later on, when they did have that power, that's when rules regarding governance would be revealed, naturally. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in the year 570 of our common era. When he was about 40 years old, so that would be the year 610, that's when he began to receive revelations from God. And those revelations came a little bit at a time, one snippet at a time, a few verses here, a few verses there, over the period of 23 years, responding sometimes to questions that were put before the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And of course, over time, we can see the development within the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as various verses of the Quran deal with issues that were more relevant later on. So prayer is one of the core components of the Muslim faith, and we can see that the prayer, which is called salat in Arabic and is a very defined form that Muslims use in prayer, there is something distinctive about the Muslim prayer. That was already there in the earlier days of the Muslim community, while the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was still in Mecca. But then he migrated. He migrated after 13 years of being in Mecca, where he and his followers were being persecuted, and then he migrated to Medina, another city about 400 kilometers to the north. That is where new issues arose. And with the community now being settled, the regulation about fasting naturally was instituted in the Quran. And also, Muslims were being called to come back to Mecca by the Quran. And so it is important for us to see this contextual situation so you understand why the verses are speaking the way they do. But also, let's see the broad outline of the Prophet's life. So in the second year of the migration, that's when the Muslims were being directed to turn towards Mecca as their where they're going to face in prayer. That would mark off the Muslim community as a distinct community from the other communities that faced either East specifically or Jerusalem in more particularly. The Muslims were to face Mecca from wherever they are. And so it has become a global phenomenon that wherever Muslims are, they're turning their faces in the direction of Mecca in order to offer their formal ritual prayer. Whereas, of course, we can appeal to God in any language, in any direction, at any time, and in any place, because God hears all and sees all and understands all languages. But that was a distinctive moment in the second year of the Hijrah. What is described as the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is event-based. People can remember this major event. And some of the events were battles that were imposed upon the Muslims when non-Muslims wanted to wipe out the religion and to decimate the followers. So they came in one army after another marching against the Muslims. The Muslims met them at various junctures. First at Badr, that was in the second year of the Hijrah. So when we read the 8th chapter of the Quran, it's actually talking about the Battle of Badr. So if you don't know something about the battle, then we wouldn't understand what the surah is about. So knowing this is a key to unlocking the meaning of that surah. The next major battle was the Battle of Uhud the following year. That's the 3rd year of the Hijrah. And the 3rd chapter of the Quran speaks about the Battle of Uhud. If you don't know the battle, we won't understand what the Quran is talking about. The 5th year, the allies, banded together in a large force, besieging the Muslim community at Medina, and they were held off. And after 3 weeks, they abandoned the enterprise because they were not making any headway. And the 33rd chapter of the Quran, called the chapter of the allies, makes mention of this. So it's a brief mention, but we need to understand what it's talking about by knowing something from outside of the Quran, the history about this particular battle. Following year, having survived this onslaught from the Allied forces, the Muslims set out to perform a lesser pilgrimage to Mecca, but they were barred from entering. And they enter into a peace treaty with the Meccans. That treaty is called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, after the place in which it was signed. Now, the Quran makes reference to this, but it doesn't mention the details of the treaty. Unless we knew about those details from outside, we wouldn't understand what the Quran is talking about. The 40th chapter of the Quran is entitled the chapter of the victory, and the victory being mentioned in that chapter, according to commentators, is the victory that was achieved at the signing of this treaty. And how was the treaty itself a victory that comes without fighting? The treaty, though it was for peace, was a victory for Muslims because during the peacetime that followed this truce, more people embraced Islam than had embraced in the long period of time before that. So the Muslims saw that peace works for us because in peacetime, people have a chance to stop, to reflect, and to think about new ideas, whereas in wartime, they can only focus on fighting, and this is what they were doing, fighting the Muslims. Peace works for us, and that's a victory, but we can understand why it is a victory when we understand this background. Now, in the 8th year of the Hijrah, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, marched in with a large band of followers into Mecca. He took it over so that he could reestablish the mosque there, the Kaaba, as a place of worship, as it was dedicated for the worship of the one God by the Prophet Abraham. And so he cleansed the house of worship of all of the idols, but he spared the people. And he said, I'm going to forgive you as Joseph forgave his brothers, as mentioned in the book of Genesis. Knowing this background helps us to understand the Quran when the Quran is speaking about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his marching into the city of Mecca. Now, the 9th chapter of the Quran was made as a public declaration to the people in the 9th year, coincidentally, of the Prophet's migration to Medina. So here he had come back to Medina. Rather, in that 9th year, he didn't come back himself, but he sent his delegation to pronounce this chapter out loud to the folks there, to let them know the city was already taken over by Muslim rule. There were still pockets of armed resistance threatening Muslims at every corner, laying ambushes for the Muslims. So they were being warned via the surah that if they do not cease and desist, then the Muslims now have permission from God to launch an offensive against them in order to reclaim peace for the land and safety for all of its citizens, including Muslims. By understanding all of this history, we have a key now to understand the Quranic revelation, especially in this case, the 9th chapter of the Quran, which declares immunity right from the very inception. And so it's called the Surah of the Immunity. Then in the 10th year, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself performed his pilgrimage. And then a few months later that he passed away. The last surah of the Quran to be revealed is said to be the Surah An-Nasr, which says, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, when the victory of God comes comes and his help. That, according to commentators, refers to the fact that people will embrace Islam eventually. And when that surah was revealed, it is said that Abu Bakr, may God be pleased with him, a close companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, realized that the Prophet, peace be upon him, will soon pass away, because the victory will mean the culmination of the whole matter, and that would mean that the Prophet, peace be upon him, will no longer be needed on earth, and God will recall him back. Understanding all of this background helps the Quran to come alive in our minds. Now, we spoke about the angel Gabriel bringing the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, so that introduces a whole new subject, but another key to understanding the meaning of the Quran, that is how did the Quran come to be revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, through the angel Gabriel? Let's think about that tomorrow. So join me again tomorrow for another key. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ally, speaking to you from the Muslim Media Hub. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. This Ramadan, we're making history together. Behind me is the building you helped us purchase for the sake of Allah for the establishment of the Muslim Media Hub. We've started filming our television program here called Let the Quran Speak, and we're training the youth to produce other such shows and videos for social media so that we can present the message of Islam to the wider world. This Ramadan, you can help us to raise $100,000 for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Please go to our website, muslimmediahub.com. May Allah bless you and all of your loved ones this Ramadan and forever. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ally, saying Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, and Ramadan Mubarak.